Well, I was involved in serving in Pakistan at Lahore Resident Office from 1988 to 1990, and the major operation that we were involved in Lahore was Operation Shalimar. DEA's global mission is very important because the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration is one of the few federal law enforcement agencies that actually has arrest powers in certain countries by treaty and actually is the front of American law enforcement spear out in the international trafficking of not only narcotics but international criminal groups, because they're transnational and they work through all different crimes, not just drug dealing. Because we're able to work with friendly foreign law enforcement and also to work in countries that are source countries for drugs coming to the United States, we can help in interdiction at the source. We can identify production and manufacturing facilities at the source and help those governments and train those governments to basically go in and interdict before it ever gets on the high seas or gets to the United States. So to try and protect also many of these organizations, the money that we work with and follow in money laundering is going into international criminal organizations and international terrorist organizations. We were very active. We were armed agents in Pakistan. We were allowed to carry firearms. We worked with the basically state and federal Pakistani authorities to work side by side on the street during street operations, during big interdictions, during airport interdictions. The Pakistani government and the United States had a treaty where we were allowed to be a part of almost every enforcement operation that we did jointly with the Pakistanis. Well, the International Narcotics Officers Association is an association of many countries, I believe 52 at the time I was in Pakistan, that worked international narcotics together, including British customs, many European customs agencies were stationed in Pakistan and in other source countries, just like DEA was. And in that, they had an association where each year major international operations that affected the traffic around the world were given awards. It happened to be that in 1990, Operation Shalimar, which started in 1988, was given not only myself, but the Pakistani police officers that worked with me. Rahmat Ullah Niazi was Deputy Superintendent of Police. Mustafa Khan was the head of Pakistani's customs at the time, and a DEA FSN, Rahim Sheikh, were all given the award. Operation Shalimar started to target the organization of Pakistan's largest heroin trafficker and smuggler, Haji Iqbal Beg. At the time, after 2 years, we had seized over 4.5 tons of heroin that was bound either for the United States or Europe. We seized, and this was an interesting seizure, over 6 tons of non-sterile poppy seeds, which are basically the poppy seeds used to grow the poppies that produce the opium. And we also worked on a bank, which is now defunct, but the Bank of Commerce and Credit International, BCCI Bank, huge money laundering case with customs out of New York that we worked. One of the headquarters of BCCI was in Lahore, Pakistan, where I served, and we worked a lot of money laundering with the Brits and with New York DEA and New York Customs to bring that bank down. The bank actually fell after we took down the operation of Haji Iqbal Beg. Well, Operation Shalimar started really as a local concentration in the Punjab of Pakistan, which Lahore, Pakistan was the capital. And basically, one of the world's most notorious heroin traffickers lived in Lahore, Pakistan, Haji Iqbal Beg. He had a smuggling organization that was throughout the world, Europe, Canada, the United States. And with the help of Pakistani state police and with the help of Pakistani customs, we started to do small surgical raids of depots where heroin and opium were kept around the Punjab as we got informants to give us information, and also working with the Central Intelligence Agency because we were very close with the CIA in Lahore. At the time, the Afghanis were fighting the Russians, and they were not producing the majority of Southwest Asian heroin. The Pakistanis were. So we started to hit these depots, and it started getting bigger and bigger, and eventually came to Beg was also a movie producer and ran a movie studio like Bollywood. And it came to a raid on that studio where we seized a lot of document records and seized several computers from his office. Pakistani police seized them and turned them over to us. And that's when the investigation became larger and more international in scope, because the records kept on that computer drive and kept in his file cabinets opened up a Pandora's box for his smuggling organization that we could find all around the world at that point, and how the money was coming back into the Bank of Commerce Credit International, and how there were other things being smuggled back into Pakistan that came into focus way later, about after Beg's extradition to the United States. Beg was a very proud Muslim man, and he was very well known throughout all of Pakistan. Pakistan is controlled basically by 25 families. And he was in one of those families, and he was very prestigious. Even though he was an international narcotics trafficker, he was also a very top citizen of his country. Beg believed that his country would never allow him or anybody in his family to be arrested for any type of crime. And Beg, being a proud Muslim man and his culture, walked into the United States consulate in Lahore and demanded, after we raided his property, to speak to me, because he wanted his computers and his records back, and knowing that we were on his home soil, not our home soil. So myself and my partner Gil Howard, Special Agent Gil Howard, sat in my office in the Lahore consulate and spent about 7 hours with Haji Iqbal Beg, as he described to us that he understood that we had a job as American law enforcement, and he was a man, and he respected that, and he respected us. But he also wanted us to respect him, because he had a job, and his country and the people around him depended on him for wealth and money, and that we should just capitulate to that and give back his records. He detailed many of his smuggling operations. He also told us about people both in governments in Europe and the United States that helped him and were friendly to him. He talked about paying officials all around the world. And it was the longest DEA 6 I ever wrote in my life. It was 36 pages. But Beg had given up so much information. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "I will never be prosecuted. That's why I wanted to come in and just man to man let you know that, so don't waste your time," basically. And me being a very young DEA agent at the time and very maybe brash, I pointed at him across the desk, which is kind of a foul in the Muslim world, to point at someone, point towards their chest. And I told him that someday, if it takes my entire career, you son of a, I will see you in an American courtroom. At that point, he got very angry with me, and he stormed out of the consulate. It had a large effect. The actual, prior to the arrest, had a larger effect on myself and my family. And then what had happened was we were evacuated from Pakistan. Beg attempted to kidnap my kindergarten son from the Lahore American School and trade him for the records and the computers that we seized. And then Beg sent people to attempt to to eliminate me and my partner, Agent Gil Howard. At that point, the intelligence from the Central Intelligence Agency identified that that was happening. DEA was notified, and I was evacuated out of the country with my family within 72 hours. When I got back here, I was reassigned, obviously, and eventually was reassigned to Quantico. And in 1993, Beg was indicted in the Southern District of New York on the charges that we had developed from Operation Salamar, and also from New York Group, I believe Group 32, who had done a large investigation with us. Special Agent Brian Avery and some of the folks in that group had concentrated on Beg's organization Brian and I were both Baltimore cops together back in the day, and we were communicating with each other while I was in Pakistan, and New York did a lot of work on that. In 1995, Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, when Pakistan became a more free country, extradited Beg and his number two to the United States, and they were brought to the Southern District of New York, just like Mr. Maduro, to have an identity hearing and to stand trial for what had happened in Pakistan and what had happened across the world. What eventually happened was Beg became an informant for the Central Intelligence Agency. And after he was identified, and after I saw him in court in New York, which I got to do and got to identify him in a Rule 10 hearing, about 6 months later, Haji Iqbal Beg was no longer on the scene in the American justice system. And that was because of what we talked about with that smuggling. Because he was one of the world's greatest smugglers at the time and had an organization all over the world, he became an informant for the Central Intelligence Agency and helped them piece together for the United States government all the smuggling that was done to put together Pakistan's nuclear weapon, because he was part of it. So why was all the tension that happened with DEA in Pakistan then? Had almost nothing to do with the drugs at that point. It had everything to do with something much more serious. But that's how DEA international operations get involved in these things. And as for Beg being replaced as a kingpin, he was, and it's noted in many articles, including the Los Angeles Times, the largest heroin trafficker in Pakistan, if not in the world at the time, when he was brought to the United States in '95. But the shift of heroin being produced in Southwest Asia and sent to Europe and America had already started to happen. It moved to Colombia. And the Colombians took over really the East Coast heroin distribution within the 90s up to 2000. Most of the heroin seen in the United States was now coming out of Colombia and not out of Southwest Asia. So it wasn't so much that he was replaced, the Colombians replaced by taking over the market, basically. No. The kingpins that emerged were the Colombian cartels. And DEA obviously shifted its focus very quickly. At the time that I served international operations in Pakistan, we had 25 DEA agents in Pakistan and roughly about the same number in Colombia back then. Now, obviously, there's several hundred agents have been in Colombia, and Pakistan still has just a small footprint of DEA agents. You go where the threat is, and DEA is very good at identifying that and move to the threat shifted. So you have to shift your operations. Well, international operations, as for DEA, I didn't get to return overseas, but I know that from all of my colleagues that have worked overseas and for 5 years at training and the other time as I spent as a supervisor at SOD, that international operations for DEA were still robust overseas. I worked and ran in the Colombian heroin unit at SOD, Special Operations, and we constantly focused on the heroin cartels out of Colombia after that, with agents in Colombia doing unbelievable work, along with agents on the East Coast and the West Coast doing wiretaps and different operations. So DEA operations stayed. We also got to the point where we were doing SOD intercepts from Afghanistan when we had troops there, and assisting. We had JSOC representatives from the military at SOD to assist them in protecting their troops while we were listening in Afghanistan. So I think that DEA's international operations have nothing but grown since I was 40 years ago when I was an agent in Pakistan. I think right now, as you see it, what happened just 2 weeks ago here, or a week ago, with the arrest of Maduro, back to the arrest of Manuel Noriega, DEA is the tip of the spear when it comes to federal law enforcement outside the borders of the United States. They can be relied on. They have great intelligence. They work really well with our intelligence community, both CIA, NSA, the folks DIA. We understand that pre-9/11, but even more now, that working as a team is the only way to get the job done. And sharing, even no matter doesn't worry about sharing the credit. Share the information so that we can protect the American people. That's basically what it was all about. I think it's hugely important. Fentanyl is a killer. Fentanyl is now a weapon of mass destruction, which means it's used just like any other terrorist weapon. So many Americans, young Americans, have died from fentanyl. I live in a small county of less than 30,000 people. I have a sheriff's department that's very professional but very small, and they are saying that every day they use Narcan on fentanyl patients. That is frightening. It is frightening when you have 6 grandchildren. It is frightening when you see the pictures when you walk in the hall here at DEA headquarters of how many Americans have died and how many families have been destroyed. This is a scourge. So what Administrator Cole is doing, and I know that's been called before the scourge of drugs, but it is so true. This is a very dangerous drug brought here by a lot of our enemies, the Chinese, the Venezuelans, the Mexican cartels, and basically to sow really bad things happening in the United States. So Administrator Cole's initiative and DEA's frontline work, along with other agencies, is so important in this attack. Again, like I said, I have 6 grandchildren. I don't want to have any one of them, the oldest is 11, have that threat. And hopefully with the work that's going on now and the initiatives out in the community that DEA is spearheading, it's not just enforcement. Demand reduction is important, education is important. There are so many pieces to the puzzle. You can't arrest your way out of anything, but you have to be able to put it all together. And I think Administrator Cole and the folks at DEA are doing yeoman's work and trying to do that. And one of my colleagues, who was my last supervisor in DEA, former SAC Derek Maltz, huge as a private citizen in trying to help these families with his background from DEA. So I really think that that combination can become very helpful and hopefully help to stop the fentanyl issues that are happening, along with what our military is doing now and DEA is doing overseas. Again, going back to international operations. I think that's very important.